Welcome to Cyber Bytes, the podcast where we deep dive into the latest in cybersecurity, technology, and everything in between. I'm your host, Edwin Kwan, and today we're tackling a major incident that has shaken the tech world. The recent CrowdStrike update that led to a global IT outage and the infamous blue screen of death on millions of Windows machines. This incident has brought to light critical lessons in DevSecOps and the importance of business continuity planning. Joining me today is Denny Wan, who is the founder of the Reasonable Security Institute and an expert in cybersecurity and risk quantification. Welcome to the show, Denny.
Thank you, Edwin. Good to talk to you, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with your audience and your community.
To set the stage, let's briefly recap what happened. CrowdStrike, a leading cybersecurity company, issued an update for its Falcon sensor software that inadvertently caused a catastrophic failure in the Windows system globally. This update, which runs at the kernel level of the operating system, led to widespread blue screen of death, affecting airlines, banks, hospitals, and many other critical infrastructure. The fallout was immense, with millions of computer systems crashing and significant disruption in services worldwide. Any thoughts on that, Denny?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's so tragic that you see people with family of young kids queuing out at the airport hours on end, do not know whether to get on a plane to the holiday. And fortunately, in Australia, we are spared of the worst of it because guess what? Holiday just finished a week ago. So no one at the airport queuing for hours. There were, but not families where you were literally thousands of people, young children that were screaming their heads off, I'm sure. At the airport in the Northern Hemisphere, the worst time for airlines to experience it. The next worst time is Christmas. So definitely the graphic is really bad.
It was a terrible time for traveling, for sure. So one of the key points for discussion here is the role of DevSecOps in this incident. Typically, software running at the kernel level undergoes rigorous testing to be certified by Windows. However, CrowdStrike bypassed some of these protocols to deliver timely updates. Denny, can you shed some light on the importance of thorough testing in DevSecOps, especially for software that operate at such a critical level?
Absolutely. Well, I must first admit that I'm no expert when it comes to software architecture. You are the expert here. You're the security architect. But however, I could speak from an auditor perspective, boring stuff like my expertise is risk assurance, which is a fancy term for auditing, and specifically I have experienced and trained in the global security standard called ISO 20001, and I expect a lot of your audience at least heard about that standard and recognize that it is a respected standard for measuring information security management. But I don't tell you too much about the software development security. There are other standards to help with those. I think you are much more expert than I am. But if I may, just put in a context and think of the invitation to speak with you, to your audience, is that my background is a little unusual, and the committee representing here is FAIR, F-A-I-R, and I would expect most of the audience had never come across that standard, and nothing to do with fairness, although we may help in that conceptualization. What is a fair and reasonable response and action to take to respond to those incidents and prevent future ones? And it's not come down to investments. As it always say, anything is possible, something more. Effort. And the amount of effort in hindsight is easy to tell. But before the incident, but perhaps lesser investment may be good enough, and good enough is sufficient. just as if, well, before the incident. And FAIR stands for Factor Analysis of Information Risk, which is published by Open Group, which also publish the TOGAP standard. And of course, being a secure architect, you will be very familiar. TOGAP is the enterprise architecture standard for communicating not the technology, but the business value of secure architecture. So the business executives on the board understand the proportionality of investing, and once again, is a focus investment on security architecture. And as I said earlier on, everything's possible. Some take more effort, and it is the job of the executive and the board to really challenge and scrutinize every dollar you spend. Particularly, we enter into a global slowdown and hopefully avoiding a recession. But dollar need to be watched every single day. So yeah, hopefully I've given a little bit of background and my perspective on this conversation.
So that's really insightful. The CrowdStrike just recently released their preliminary PIR, and they talk about there were some failures in their testing controls, and it ties in very clearly with DevSecOps, like how much testing do you do? One of their recommendations was to do more local development testing in there. So clearly there is now a shift in investing more in their testing protocols. Any comments on that?
Absolutely. In fact, I have read the latest update. I think came out yesterday. As you alluded to, CrowdStrike had confirmed, which is what we all expected, that particular content that caused the crashed blue screen of death was not picked up by the automated testing tool, and they project emphasized that, in fact, they have a very comprehensive quality assurance testing for the normal software release, because this is not considered a software release. So they were only using automated test tool. And I have to wonder, if I were queuing at the terminal, do I really care too much about the terminology? It is a major software release or content update. To me, the end result is what matters to me. And so if I were affected by the incident, unfortunately I wasn't, I would be quite angry that my family had to suffer and sleeping on the floor, screaming kids around me, because CrowdStrike decided that automated tool is good enough for them. And an analogy I want to use might be a little bit easier to understand. If my kids get sick, I give them Panadol, and then the Panadol manufacturers or other painkillers decided to tune the chemical composition because of pricing issue and things like that, which has happened, and they fell ill. I don't think the executive will be issue a pressing to say, our QA automated testing for a drug file didn't catch a particular contamination. I'm sorry, your kids fell sick. They would have already been arrested for potential manslaughter. And I would think that's likely to actually materialize because hospitals are affected. And this is not even ransomware. So I think we're going to put perspective and not allow lawyers or people, because kind of give us a perspective just on terminology is, well, automated testing, it is what we do and it's always worked. And if I can close out on one final observation on their press release I read earlier today, or released yesterday, was literally, I would say, adding insult to injury, because that very statement also said they have reminded the subscribers that they had choice of 3 deployment choice, and N-1, N-2. They put that statement to say, we have given you the tools and you could have exercised the tool as the right. So which one should I use right now? the end version, because that's what you and Microsoft told us we needed it ASAP when you release a content update. And it's all safe. So hopefully that put a reality check into the situation.
That is so interesting, isn't it? Because from their perspective, this is not a normal software delivery, so it doesn't have to go through the same rigorous testing. But the impact of a failure in testing or a failure in the software has huge consequences, like we've already seen. So they could have, I guess, done some of the risk quantification for what would have been involved for automating that process itself. Like it could have been done a lot better, but they did not. You talk about the N and N-1, but I've read some complaints from some users out there that this rapid release actually ignored those policies. So it didn't matter if you were configuring it to be N, N-1, or N-2. All your systems actually picked up this update. So even if you actually took a risk-based approach and didn't configure your critical systems to be running on N by N-1, you still got impacted by this update. That was pretty interesting.
Absolutely. So I just making a factual observation that was stated in the press release, draw attention to the fact, and it's the fact that the subscriber do have that option. Now, as I say early on, from my perspective, reading of it, fortunately, I wasn't in fact impacted by the incident. It's literally adding insult to injury that you are being not taking care of yourself when you're given your tools. Now, I'm not expert in the CrowdStrike ecosystem, but this is also a good pivot into another perspective in this stat incident. Hopefully, no one will seriously harm other than Bruce Eagle and missing the flights. That the elephant in the room is that what about the victim organizations? Did they make themselves a victim, as CrowdStrike alluded to? Well, they basically pay. Have they thought about that? Should they have thought about that? Is that something the airline could have thought about? That could have happened. And this is coming back, I think, the DevSecOps conversation, which is adding the security dimension to DevOps. And DevOps is a momentum created probably only just 20 years ago. I think credit to Galicia in Australia that recognized that the speed of software development need to match the speed of business in the information age, and a traditional waterfall methodology in terms of release control. Now, this is your expertise. I'm just pretending to know. Is no longer fast enough, and so and sec probably afterthought because it slowed down DevOps, and really it become now a difficult question for the victims. And after the blind and presumably going to sue CrowdStrike for compensation, that's not going to save your skin, because I think what CrowdStrike said has a point. Why do you allow your system to consume a poison update uncontrolled? And if there were a case of doing your choice, I wonder why, as you university observed, most patches, including critical ones, were not deployed for 180 days. That is a comment, and there are different number of bands around, but certainly patches are not deployed ASAP, as or ASD might mandate that internet-facing asset 40 hours. Maybe those assets are subject to this regime, but most non-internet-facing assets, they are not getting patched. As soon as the patch are released, and as we know, even Log4j after 2 years, a lot of those are not being patched. So this really exposed the so underbelly or the victim to trying to claim victimhood. The CrowdStrike challenge them is, why do you allow yourself to be a victim in the first place? And don't blame us for your own failure to keep your house in order. Will be very interesting court cases to come out is who exactly is at fault and what is the proportionality of the contribution to the situation, and thus the amount of compensation they can really claim.
It's very interesting when I hear you definitely touch on quite a few interesting topics in there. I know in DevSecOps, you have that balance of going fast, getting things out there. But as you kind of alluded to, it has to be commensurate to the potential risk that a failure in that software or system can allude to. And obviously the question now is, what is that balance? And for a company like CrowdStrike, where what you're delivering are meant to be updates to the latest malware, the latest threats, how fast is too slow? And how do you get that right balance? So it's a very interesting kind of conundrum that the organizations have. And similar to what you say about organizations with their own patching, their own systems, what do they do in there for that? So that's an interesting one to kind of see how that pans out, or what their mitigations are. Are they going to slow down and kind of put up more guardrails, take up more breaks to do that? But that comes at a potential business cost, where if there are adversaries and active attacks happening, those updates are going to be arriving slightly later than what they normally would have. But this is a good segue to talk about what you mentioned earlier about the business continuity planning, those BCP failures potentially for those organizations. I believe that it was like a watershed moment for most organizations, not realizing how dependent their systems were on a system like CrowdStrike. I kind of shared a piece a few days ago where I kind of talk about how as people in cybersecurity, we assess third-party systems coming in. And if a software wanted to be deployed on all your workstations running at as a very high privilege program in your bootstrap program, and it was not just running using a software that they provided you, but it was constantly receiving updates from the internet that you obviously do not have an opportunity to review before it gets deployed. What would your situation be on that? And I would say, as a security person, I would be concerned. But because it's CrowdStrike, it's a cybersecurity tool, we have a lot more trust in those systems. But we need to kind of manage those trusts with adequate business continuity planning to deal with situations like that. What would be some of your key takeaways that you would think that organizations would take from this particular incident?
I thank you for that question. I think in Australia, we have an advantage in that our regulatory framework does give some guidance, and the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority, APRA, short for APRA, has published a couple of standards. The one of which is some of the audience might have come across, CPS 234, came in enforcement in July 1, 2019, some 4 years ago now. That is a cyber security standard that regulated entities, about, I think, 4,000 regulated entities in Australia, primarily banks, depositing organizations, insurers, and financial services organizations. And that is a very short and business-oriented standard, and it shows the thinking of the regular APRA in this case. They focus on the outcome rather than the means. So when you look at the CPS 234 expressions, paragraph 13, there's only 36 paragraphs. I cannot remember some of those by heart now. It's making it very simple that the board, the chairman of the board, is accountable, not the CISO, not the CIO, not the CTO. The chairman of the board is accountable to assure APRA that the security capability commensurate with threat There's a simple equation. Security capability, we know what they have, right? You got budgets, you got cybersecurity roadmap. Threats, well, maybe we do know, but knowing those two critical pieces of information, pieces of the puzzle, are not sufficient. The chairman of the board is not to discover those. They got expert staff members, CISOs, CIOs, and CIOs to measure the security capability, or report the security capability and what they invest in, and also to measure the risk. The chairman of the board is to make, as you just alluded to, the value judgment. Does it commensurate? Of course, we often speculate that organization could hire people for the budget they have. So if you want to be a CISO for an organization and the risk assessment said exposure is $50 million, and you're able to convince the board you can do it for 25, you're more likely to get a job than the other guy said, in my experience, you need 100 million to invest over 5 years. And therefore, it really creates a challenge, a management challenge, risk management challenge is how do you make sure to commensurate? Now, and the committee represents, as I mentioned earlier, FAIR is a global community of practitioners and risk management practitioners, not necessarily technologists, but mostly risk management folks that build expertise in measuring the risk rather than the security capability. So we're on the other side of the equation. Security capability commensurate threat. We measure the threat in dollar values that you can then weigh up. And once you have that measurement, it's much easier to see, I don't think you commensurate. Because if your measure risk using FAIR is $50 million and your security investment capability are only enough to buffer, including insurance coverage, not just cyber insurance, but the business insurance, $10 million, you're going to get quite short. And I would expect CrowdStrike and the victim organization won't face that reality very soon. Should compensation claim is, have they got enough allowance to cover the claims? And this is exactly the challenge now many banks are now facing, because OIC, who initiated a prosecution against them in the federal court only a couple of months ago, had alleged, or all the things they can allege, they failed to take reasonable steps to protect the policyholders. They didn't say about the technology that you do that. That's a compliance approach. And that make it much harder to defend these accusations and prosecution in a court situation. But CPS 234 are given very clear guidance. You should have known, see that coming, because you, as the chairman of the board, has to do that calculation and to defend your decisions. Hopefully that is a useful background.
That is definitely very useful, and I think most organizations will be reviewing their BCP plans and making sure that it is commensurate. Let's start to wrap up here, and I know we focus on the lessons learned and the steps that can be taken to prevent such incidents in the future. So Denny, would you like to just provide a quick summary on what we discussed in terms of what should companies prioritize to enhance their DevSecOps practices and to ensure robust BCP?
Absolutely, thank you for the opportunity. So, you have very clearly articulated the situation of CrowdStrike impact, and we talk a little bit about the natural inclination is there's a failure in the DevOps operation or the security aspect, because it was a software distribution. So definitely it's a DevOps process, and they're accelerating that using automated tools. And by adding insult to injury, that they do give you the tools to have checks in there by setting up a policy of N-1, N-2, rather than just end and get the updates as soon as it's released. that's the debatable, as you alluded to. Is that a realistic situation that the subscriber can exercise? Then we started to, from that sort of observations, that at a broader level, the DevSecOps is a technical dimension of the debate, but really represent a broader failure in the BCP planning, not only just within CrowdStrike into the DevOps or DevSecOps processes, but equally the victim organization, and as CrowdStrike alluded to, whether they have made sufficient effort and leveraging the tools like N-1, N-2 policy to dampen the speed of propagation of problems. Why do they allow propagation so widespread across the infrastructure landscape? But let me close out and answer your question. So my recommendation to your audience is please have a look at the FAIR framework as a risk decision support tool to allow you to calculate a defensible risk measurements. So informed conversation in investment on technology can be baselined and have informed conversation. And the last point I made was that has already been the expectation expressed through CPA 234, been in enforcement for almost 4 years, since July 1, 2019 in Australia. And a big part of CPA 234 is managing the same expectation through your supply chain. In fact, one of the biggest pushback and finally complied is managing supply chain risk, exactly scenario you're talking about. So hopefully that is a helpful summary.
Thank you, Danny, for sharing your insights on these critical issues. We will definitely include the links to FAIR in the show notes, and we'll include links to Danny on LinkedIn. You should connect with him. He has lots of interesting insights on this area of risk quantification and FAIR. So the CrowdStrike incident serves as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities in our IT infrastructure and the importance of rigorous testing, robust BCP, and managing supply chain dependencies. For our listeners, please stay vigilant and proactive in your cybersecurity practices. Thank you for tuning into Cyber Bytes. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a review. Until next time, stay safe and stay secure. See ya.
Thank you.